It's September the 12th, 2012. I'm Mike Benedetti. This is 508, a show about Worcester. Today on the show, Brendan Melican.
How are you, sir?
Very good. And Kevin Ksen. How are you doing, Kevin?
Good, very good.
You know, Kevin, it's great that you're on the show because this week in Worcester, it's Ksen level yellow. Public meetings that must be attended, activism that must happen. This week we're going to talk about voting. We're going to talk about Start on the Street, and that might be the whole show. This is 508. This is a show where we talk about Worcester. We attempt to be clear without being simple. We attempt to be entertaining without trivializing. We attempt to be, most importantly, 30 minutes long.
And oftentimes we fail at all of that.
Oftentimes we fail at all three of those goals. Kevin, how are you doing?
Good, very good. I've been out in the woods.
You've been out in the woods. Well, so I don't know if you knew this, Kevin, but there was a primary election in Worcester last week.
I'd heard about that.
There were some various voting controversies and whatever around that. I wanted to ask you first. By the way, that was a joke. Also, we're ironic on this show, and we're kind of smart asses on the show sometimes. Kevin, you worked very hard on the Mary Keefe campaign.
I did.
Now, this is like and Mary Keefe, who was running for state rep from one of the districts in Worcester, 15th district, won the Democratic primary for that district. Because the Democrats are so powerful in this area, the assumption is that whoever wins the Democratic primary wins the state rep. So the assumption is Mary Keefe, barring some amazing event, becomes the next state rep from Worcester. Where is this district, by the way? What's that?
It's kind of Florida-shaped. It runs basically from, and of course it's zigzagged it a lot, but kind of from May Street all the way down Park Avenue, all the way to Highland. And then Highland straight down up Belmont to the lake.
Okay.
And then back on the other side, zigzagging through Maine, through Green Island, and then basically up Hamilton all the way through the lake.
Okay.
So it's pretty Florida-shaped, I would say.
Okay. Yeah, I move in Worcester, every couple of years, and I never know whenever I'm moving to another state rep district or not. It's so completely mysterious to me where these districts are.
Once you do figure it out, usually they'll figure out a way to change them on you.
They change them from
this
time
one
to
was
time?
just redistricted due to the last census.
There you go. Well, Kevin, I wanted to ask you, now you also have, you've worked, for example, yourself, you've worked on many, many things down through the decades in Worcester, but most recently you worked on, you helped somebody get elected in Southbridge, you helped Soraya Rivera.
Amelia
Peliquin get elected to Southbridge Town Council. You helped Soraya Rivera get elected to Worcester City Council. You've worked on 3 campaigns of 3 progressive women in 2 years. They've all won, all upstart challengers. When did you suddenly learn how to win elections? What did you learn exactly? How did this happen?
Well, I think what I say to folks to start with is it's really not different a lot than community organizing.
But you worked on a lot of elections before this.
I've helped out on some. It's been these 3 that I had leadership roles. So certainly Mary and Soraya was campaign manager. Amelia's I had a strong consulting role and guiding force. And of course Amelia has been around Worcester learning from us with Soraya's campaign.
Right.
But it is community organizing. It's basically a short period of time you have to organize a mixture of folks that are all volunteers basically and get everybody moving in the same direction and try to build up some momentum. The goals, you have a goal. In the case of community organizing, it might be pools or dealing with the police. In the case of a campaign, it's getting somebody elected. It's building momentum, keeping people together, and good communication.
And this campaign didn't have a lot of. There were not a lot of votes in this primary. The distance between the candidates was 200 votes.
Yeah. Well, there was nothing to compare this race to. It was a Thursday election. Nobody in the world. You can ask everybody in Worcester, what's a Thursday election like in Worcester? Nobody has any memory of there ever being a Thursday election. So you have nothing to compare it to.
I guess whenever I hear 200, I just think one person hustling could potentially get 200 votes in a week for a candidate.
I think you could say that on a Tuesday. I think on a Thursday, a few days after Labor Day weekend,
it's hard. Yeah.
It's hard, and that was the challenge from the beginning of how are we going to educate people and inspire them to get out of their houses on a few days after Labor Day on a Thursday. That was the biggest challenge.
With well-known challengers in the race.
Exactly.
That's true, because the other people running this race were Bashai, who's run many times before, Kay Toomey, who's always been very successful in running for city council, Diana Biancaria, who is on the school. She's on the school committee, right? Yeah. So you have other people who are actually serving on.
All of whom had big signs.
You're also, I know, against standouts. Is that right?
I'm 100% standouts. Yeah, I think we did 2 official ones during the campaign and 1 the day after the election, so 3 official ones total. Carpers did a few on their own, but we, as a campaign, we did 3. I'm against big signs. We did 0 big signs.
Here's what I'm going to say. Based on So Jeremy Shulkin, who lives in the district, actually got mail, like the mailers from the candidates. All the mailers, I have a lot of problems with. But the Mary Keefe mailers had consistent spelling and consistent capitalization. And to me, I think that's the key.
That is key. The one other piece I just got to get out there, I actually didn't realize this till election day as I was sitting there. We were on the Jordan Levy show 0 times.
So
I asked to get on. He never got back to me. We ended up never going on the Jordan Levy show. So conventional wisdom is you're supposed to go on the Jordan Levy show. We didn't do Jordan.
Not anymore.
We're happy to go on. Now try again. But
something else? None of these people went on the 508 show either.
There we go.
Oh, man, it's the end of legacy media. Brendan Melican. It's the end of the mainstream.
It feels that we ruined it.
Us and Jordan Levy, we're going the way of the dinosaur. Unless do you have any comments about the primary? Otherwise, we could talk about voting controversy.
We can move on to voting controversy.
Let's move on to voting controversy. So, actually, let's talk about Start on the Street real quick. Start on the Street, the 10th anniversary of this fantastic arts festival in Worcester. Like this thing which brings tens of thousands of people to the city. It's happening on Park Avenue. You've been to it. If you haven't been to it, you've heard about it. Park Avenue, Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Be out there. Love it. Live it. One of the great things about Worcester is this arts festival.
I'm told that the numbers bumped up quite a bit this year for vendors and artists actually at the festival. So
I think
if
it's
you've been in the
better.
past and you have any concern that you might be seeing the same thing twice, I'm told this year you're not going to see the same thing twice, and you might actually have to put aside the whole day to see the entire festival. There's going to be so many artists there. So.
It's a good thing. And plus, just a lot of good people from Worcester go to this thing, and it's always fun to talk to them. Normally we talk off the cuff on this show, but because this voting thing is such a series of rat holes, I want to actually just like read something teleprompter style, speech style to you guys, and explain what this is, what happened with this primary. There's a group of right-wing people who tried to show that there were serious problems with the last election in Worcester last November. They failed miserably, and I actually appreciate their work because I think if that many passionate people can spend that much time and they couldn't find evidence of a legitimate problem, the local elections must be pretty clean. And especially in a state and a city where one political party controls so much of the stuff, I think the concerns over corruption are pretty serious. But, so far so good. And these guys, they're a bunch of Tea Party people. And now they have changed to a name that doesn't have Tea Party in it, called Activate Worcester. And they were back for the primary election in Worcester to try and find some problems in the election. And some of them were just observing the polls, some of them were working at the polling areas, and there's no problem with any of that, except that some of the observers were hassling voters, like they got in people's faces. In one case, they were trying to record a conversation between two people in the polling area. They were saying, people who were speaking Spanish, they said, "Speak English!" And this seems like it crosses some line from observing the polls and making sure that this is a transparent, good process to just intimidating people. Now, a number of credible people in the community, including Councillor Sarai Rivera, have stated that they witnessed this nonsense firsthand. And some of the people involved haven't been identified, but others, like Bonnie Johnson, the leader of both the Seven Hills Tea Party and this group Activate Worcester, have been identified. And we've also had a number of poll workers speaking about this problem before the Election Commission this week, all of them incidentally connected with the Tea Party. Certainly nobody is saying that people on the radical right can't be at the polls or can't organize themselves to be at the poll in force, as they have done, because politics is all about being organized, right? I mean, this week people were making fun of the idea that there could be some sort of conspiracy on one side or the other around this election. And like elections in this country are all about conspiracy. They're all about these two big above-ground conspiracies called the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. So it's all about getting organized, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But there's concern from the city clerk and the city council and the election commission that poll workers should be well trained in how to handle these situations, and it should be made clear to poll watchers what is poll watching and what is intimidating voters, and that allegations of more serious misconduct, like misinforming voters of their rights, should be investigated. And since we view pretty much everything on this show through the lens of the internet, we also got to mention that the Activate Worcester website went down shortly after this fiasco, and last time I checked, it was not back up. Personally, I'm happy to talk for a long time about what I think their WordPress issue might be. But that's a whole separate question. We don't actually know how many votes were challenged. The city doesn't keep records on that, and short of a court order or a recount, that evidence is only found in the ballots themselves, which is locked away. So that's where we are, guys. We've got these allegations. We got a lot of people going on the record talking about these allegations. We got a lot of local politicians saying these are serious, a couple of them saying that they're not serious. Where do we stand here? What's going on?
And we have three 3 counselors calling for an investigation.
3 counselors are calling for, which counselors are calling for investigation?
Rivera, Palmieri, Russell.
Okay. And they're saying but we don't know what that means, an investigation.
Right. I don't think any of them defined that. I think George Russell came the close, and he said if voters that were turned away from the polls would come forward, he would recommend it go to the district attorney's office.
Okay. So we have that. What else is going on process-wise with this thing? I think that there's a group called the Voter Protection Network?
Voter Protection Network, led by the ACLU.
Led by the ACLU, and they have had put some requests in for the...
So they first and foremost, they led an effort to oversee the election. So
okay.
Last election, they had poll observers at the polls watching what was happening, and this election they did as well.
Okay.
There was 3 requests that came out of that group. First one was for increased training for poll workers and police officers.
Okay.
And that one actually passed the Election Commission, and the city managers offered to increase resources to the Election Commission so that can happen.
Okay.
The second request was for 2 things to be posted at the polls. One is a large sign that says every eligible voter has a right to vote today. I was there as part of that conversation. I think folks felt it was a way of giving some firm footing to people that are going to vote. So there's all kinds of this. There's a flow chart. There's fine print kind of things. One big sign that says every eligible voter has a right to vote.
I want to drill down on what that exactly is all about. But let's go to the third.
And then the third is that there needs to be an outside investigation basically, but asking that the names of those that were disruptive removed from the polls by the clerk and the police department, their names be submitted to the Secretary of State.
So there were people that were actually kicked out of the voting area, poll watchers who were kicked out of the voting
Bonnie Johnson
areas.
is one who's known by name, and the other one,
a mystery individual. There you go. See, this is what I was talking about going down rat holes and this being an issue with many angles, such as who was the person on the grassy knoll who was kicked out of the polls. We may never know that person's name. So I want to get back to the thing about the eligible voters. Does this get into this whole question of the city census and inactive voters and all this stuff?
Yeah, so part of what exacerbates all of this is the fact that this city, and this is in some ways a statewide problem, but large number of people are regularly put onto the ineligible voters list.
The inactive voters
Inactive. And so what that does is it necessitates when somebody does go vote that they are required to show some sort of proof of residency. And so what happens
That's
is...
That's important, Kevin, too, because it's not actually that they have to show ID. They have to show proof of residency. So it could be a utility bill or what have you, but a lot of people do interpret that as being you need to show ID
and
in
there's
those cases.
definitely a problem that at least one poll watcher said, I don't know, on the record or off the record, said, I've been asking people for ID.
Yeah.
And really, people
who
who follow this whole issue of voting ID and know that there's some concerns around ID, mostly with the fact that most ID costs some kind of amount of money, which for the kind of high rollers who are on this show, whatever amount of money for a driver's license is not a lot of money. For people who don't have a lot of pocket money, like getting an ID is like not high on their list of priorities. So anyway, the idea is that the state requires the city to confirm everybody's residence.
That's been placed on this inactive list.
And you get put on the inactive list
because you haven't filled out a census form and returned it. And so that's part of the problem. So last year, a lot of us looked at
city census form, which is different than the federal census. This is a whole other piece of paper.
And so a lot of us looked at this closely last year. And what was frustrating was when we looked, is over 70% of Latino voters in Worcester have been moved on to the inactive list.
Right.
And over 70% of Vietnamese voters have been put on to the active list. So here you have two classes of voters that are in some ways protected as is immigrant groups and what have you. And lock, stock, and barrel, we're moving 70% plus into the inactive. So clearly something's not working that's happening.
And so the idea is that every year the city sends you a piece of paper if you're a voter and says, fill this out, mail it back to us, confirm that you still have the same address. So when you go to vote, everything will be cool. And then somehow part
of the problem is that it does hinge on that significantly. So when I looked at the voting rolls last year, there were a lot of people I found that voted 10 years in a row. They voted 10 years in a row, but because they didn't fill out the one card, they're moved on to the inactive.
Because people do. A lot of people I talk to at least think, oh, if I voted in the last election, that's confirmation that I'm like coming at the same polling area, I live in the same place. But no, it's not confirmation.
Right. And then what also happens is the city does adjust the inactive list if somebody fills out nomination papers for somebody. Right. So if I fill out the sign somebody's nomination forms, it would work, but only for those first 100 people. So the city only processes as many as it takes to put that person onto the ballot. So, like with Sarai last year, we turned in 400 names on the nomination papers, but only the first 100 were moved off of the inactive list. So, and the response from the election commission last year is, unfortunately, we don't have enough resources to be able to process all the nomination papers. So here's 300 people probably that they're mostly Latino and therefore by basic statistics were mostly inactive, that were not moved on to the active list because we didn't have the resources in the election commission to move them onto the active list.
So this is a separate issue that came up at this last primary, because
it keeps playing itself out.
So there's the question of intimidation, and again, I just want to say that I think that a lot of the people who are involved with the Tea Party or Activate Worcester or whatever are not interested in voter intimidation. Like, we actually have this clip I want to show of Ron Mata on the Activate Worcester TV show talking about the seriousness of this problem.
I keep hearing, both here in Worcester, throughout the state, and on a national basis, about people being disenfranchised for various and sundry reasons. Not being allowed to vote, being treated with a lot of disrespect at the polls, and so on and so forth. In other words, putting together an environment that would be considered intimidating. And I would be totally supportive of anybody who engages in that kind of activity being prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, period.
Now, I'm sure that there's people who are totally interested in voter intimidation, and they're saying, this is Worcester, Massachusetts. This is a city which is like the big Democratic Party stronghold of Worcester County. Let's go in there and let's give some people a hard time in areas that we know vote Democratic and just throw a couple of votes the other way.
Well, Bonnie said that. Bonnie,
she said she
in her
wants
postings in terms of trying to get people to come to her training, she says, the state just put 3,000 new voters onto the voting rolls in Worcester because of all these poor people and disenfranchised people. And that we need
the
to.
The actual quote is that there's been 3,000 new voters registered in the city of Worcester who represent people on welfare and who are disenfranchised, and they're being registered to vote for, in her words, far left-wing candidates. And I don't want to interrupt, but that's the thing that's been in my head the entire time listening to you talk is that there's 1,000,001 issues with elections anywhere. There's no question that in a city the size of Worcester, there's always going to be issues with how we can better handle election cycles, refine our processes and whatnot. But it seems that the crux of everything that's happening here is not even really what happened Thursday, because the Secretary of State's office has plenty of resources to do investigations. It's that we actually have people in our midst who aren't even Worcester residents, who for some reason are being kept awake at night by the idea that people are voting and they represent a different economic and social status than they do. And they find that so disturbing that they're going to go out of their way to ensure that those people are going to be under constant scrutiny to ensure that they're not somehow involved with gaming the system. That, to me, is just so... I'm trying to... We're on TV, so I have to remember not to swear.
Yes. Frustrating.
It's very frustrating.
Concerning.
But you just have to be so numb as a human being, just so completely devoid of anything resembling empathy to believe that only you could possibly carry the right set of knowledge and ideas and principles to be allowed into a voting booth.
The idea that, say, only whites should vote or only men should vote or only the wealthy should vote is an old idea and very popular.
But that's the key right there, because, and to Bonnie Johnson, right? I mean, 92 years ago, your vagina wouldn't be allowed into a polling place, right? I mean, we have a very, very brief history here in the United States of everybody being allowed to vote. I mean, people, our younger viewers, it's only in the 40-so-year range where people who are between 18 and 20 were allowed to vote.
Right.
This is a new thing that all of us are allowed into the polling place, and to somehow say that because someone is poor or somebody is representative of a new but growing demographic in the country, that they shouldn't be allowed to voice their opinion on how the country should be run is just, again, I mean, for a group of people that claim to be patriots, liberty-minded, and all about democracy, you don't seem to have any idea of what you're talking about.
I have to pick a nit, because this is my favorite nit of the whole thing. I was so happy to see Activate Worcester complaining about both people on welfare and the disenfranchised being registered to vote. Because, as they always say, you keep using that word, I do not think you know it means what you think it does. So disenfranchised we often use to mean sort of downtrodden and poor and having a hard life. But disenfranchised means, of course, unable to vote. As in in the women's suffrage movement, they were working to get the franchise. The civil rights movement wanted to get blacks the franchise, the ability to vote. So saying you're registering the disenfranchised to vote is exactly like saying you're teaching the illiterate to read. You could complain about it, but it makes no sense.
But
anyway,
but there's also
bad vocabulary.
But there's a great, in this again is the, we have to make sure we're viewing things through the right lenses and making sure that the arguments are the arguments that we're carrying out are the arguments we intend to have. Because you can go back to the around 2007, 2008 when the Tea Party was really just starting to get its legs under it and whatnot, and becoming a movement and starting to bring new voters into the Republican ranks.
Right.
And I'm sure that if we started going through voter data over the last 10 years, we'd find a major spike in either new registered voters who were voting for Republicans, or new Republican voters who only came onto the radar. And I've done this myself, looking at voting data. I know a few people by name who are very now active in the Tea Party, never voted in their entire lives until the Tea Party was a thing. I mean, I would never insinuate, though, that they don't have a right to vote because they're new voters, or because they haven't been part of the program long enough, even though they're in their 60s and 70s, and just decided now that this is the moment that we all need to be engaged. It would be insulting for me to say you have no right to vote. But those very people seem to have no problem at all saying just that about somebody who's just either coming to the country or just realizing that there is a lot at stake for them in each one of these elections.
Yes. Well,
That's all I got.
I have no response to that. Hi, Kevin. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Go Yellow.
I'm doing good.
I guess the one piece I'd want us to include here is that they've been working for several years now, and so at this point, there are Activate Worcester people working as poll workers and poll wardens throughout the city, and so there's this nexus that's happening in terms of what's happening, what they're trying to do. Yeah. And I think one of the scary things is this year they held poll worker trainings for poll workers, and they actively recruited and tried to bring in Worcester poll workers into their training, and Clerk Rushford had to step in and try to prevent that from happening as much as possible. Of course, he has no control of where people go, but the Tea Party was trying to train Worcester poll workers, and of course they're training them with their ideological bent, and that yes, it is show ID, and yes, there is this thing around photography, and so it just adds to the confusion and the mess.
Well, I don't know. Again, I don't want to,
How much time do you have there, Mike?
We got a few more minutes.
Yeah,
okay, go ahead.
One more thing I want to throw out there is another recurring theme that I keep seeing popping up, and people do a terrible job of trying to justify their bad behavior. And one of the things I keep hearing people saying is the reason that Activate Worcester or the Tea Party needs to do things like this is because you have groups like the New Black Panther Party doing this in other places. And that's always the example that's given. The New Black Panther Party is doing this for leftists, so we need to do it for us.
Neighbor to neighbor.
What's amazing, though, is that none of these folks that are saying this seem to recognize that the New Black Panther Party is an organization that's listed by the Southern Poverty Law Center as a hate group, and every living member of the original Black Panther Party has pointed out that they represent nothing that the Black Panther Party was all. The Black Panther Party, the New Black Panther Party, is a pretty atrocious organization.
So whenever you say that, you're basically saying, "Hey, hate groups do this. Why shouldn't we do this?"
You're basically calling yourself a hate group, which is entirely the point. No, but it's exactly what you're doing, though. You're saying they're doing this. We need to be the counter to this. But if you're trying to counter something that's that ugly, you're acknowledging that you're participating in the same atrocious behavior.
Since I hold the camera, I'm just gonna be a voice of calm here and say, again, I think there's nothing wrong with people getting organized around the political process. There's nothing wrong with anything, as long as you're not preventing a person from voting. I feel like getting a person to vote is fair game in an election. Making sure the election is clean is fair game in an election. Preventing a person from voting seems to me like a bad scene. And I'm not going to at all say that everybody who's involved with Activate Worcester, even a majority of people involved with Activate Worcester, are going in there saying, "I'm here to keep the brown man from voting. I'm here to keep Democrats from voting." They're saying, "You know what? I'm concerned about this election process in the city of Worcester. How could a whole city vote Democratic? How could that happen? There must be something going on. How could there be more than 2 people in this country who like the Democratic Party?" I'm sure that that's what they're going through their head. You know, like, but there is this, like, there are people who are, like, seem to be causing problems. And there's a lot of, you know, legitimate political people who are involved with this Activate Worcester, right? You got Donna Calorio, who's a Tea Party person who's on our school committee in Worcester. You got Senator Scott Brown, who's been helping them organize around this. Like, these guys, too, I hope would be, like, a voice of reason to go in and be like, listen, this is important. It's important that we got some poll watchers who we feel like, you know, are not going to be corrupted however we think our opponents are corrupted. Like, but let's not
Activate Worcester's very
cause
first
problems.
event was in conjunction with Senator Brown coming to Worcester. I believe it involved Senator Brown and a clown. Were the two things that were at the first Activate Worcester.
Well, there you
event.
go.
We've never had a clown on this show, I'd like to point out.
We never have. Well, we are. I don't know if we're down with the clown on this show. We're at least mildly interested in the clown on this show. Hopefully, we will soon have a clown on the show. Anyway, so I'm Michael Benedetti, the voice of reason, speaking here to you today on the show, saying that not everyone who's on this other political side of me is a bad person. I also want to point out, I want to describe the Tea Party as the radical right. I want to describe Activate Worcester as the radical right, seeing that I myself am a political and religious extremist.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I don't think there's anything bad with being radical.
The question is, when will they attempt to levitate City Hall?
There's not that kind of creativity and humor
On
on the American right
I'm
right now.
curious to know when the Tea Party plans on levitating something.
There's not enough jokes. There's not enough jokes from the Seven Hills Tea Party. This is my big feeling. The jokes are not funny.
They don't have
The fake Twitter accounts are not freaking funny.
You're the voice of reason.
I'm the voice of moderation. I say your fake Twitter accounts suck. All right. So we brought it back to the important things like Twitter, like WordPress.
There's no levity. There's
Social
no levitation.
media.
There's nothing.
There's nothing. There's no Abby Hoffman going on there. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the 508 program. Today on the show, Brendan Melican. Today on the show.
Inactive voter, Brendan Melican. Apparently I forgot to fill up my census.
Oh, you know what we're going to talk? Also, I want to talk to Worcester political mastermind Kevin Ksen. Can we talk? We got another couple minutes. Can we talk about this city census thing again?
Sure.
Because this is one of these things where it's like, talk to me like I'm stupid because I am stupid. So the city every year has to do a separate thing outside of the elections process to verify where you live based on sending you like a postcard and you mailing the postcard back to them.
They also are supposed to do it through the websites too. The city typically
Yes.
has a link on their
There's a
website where
website.
you can confirm your census, your standing if you haven't moved at all. And if I'm not mistaken, last year that link was broken. I believe
really?
there was an issue with the website, so the cards went out. And I think that's where I fell off the rails. Was
People were like, I'm going to throw this card away because I'll
I
just do it
ignore
on
the
the
card
website.
because I can hop on the web and do it, and there was an issue with the web. But to compound that, I believe part of that protocol is also if you don't fill out the census form, they're supposed to send you a reminder that you are...
It's supposed to be a two-step process.
Yeah, so in June, you're supposed to get a reminder that you were made inactive and a second chance, essentially,
Right.
to confirm you're at the same residence and get back on the rolls. I didn't get that either. And
I think the second one's supposed to be postage paid, is my memory, or something like that.
yeah, something that
Okay.
you're supposed to be able to just send right back to them. And that... I know a few people who've had this conversation with it that are now inactive that did not get that confirmation mailing either.
Does this happen every election in Worcester that 70% of the registered voters are inactive?
Well, it's only the Latinos. I think the announcement from City Hall was 50%. What was it?
50%
I
of
saw it on email.
But a big chunk of chunk of registered voters are inactive.
But those numbers are particularly are of particular importance because you mentioned two demographics that are growing demographics. So each election cycle that goes by, that the hard number that's represented by that percentage is growing as well. So you've got a larger percentage of the registered voters are being left out of that process, or at least it's more difficult. And because my polling place is right up the street from my house, it's very easy for me to walk there. I might not have my driver's license with me, and I tend to not walk around with a gas bill. I can't imagine I'm the only one that would be a problem for.
I don't know. I just never heard this. Maybe people complain about this every election. I never heard this complaint before about like inactive voters, because there were definitely people who like emailed me that day and were like, "Hey, I was just at the polling place and they were like, show some ID," and I was like, "I live in America. We don't show ID. What are you talking about?" And they were like, "Too bad. You're on a special list." And they're like, "What?" That people don't. This is just outside of people's normal experience of voting. That there's this whole.
So it's been a conversation
limbo.
happening in Worcester for a few years. I think the Tea Party is shining more light on it, and so there's this push to have people behave in a certain way when they have that small I next to their name.
All right.
And that's been the crux of the matter.
I don't know what that means, but okay.
Inactive.
Inactive. Oh, the I for inactive. All right.
Big I for independent.
Independent. All right.
Little I for inactive.
Worcester, stay strong. Stay true to yourself. Stay true to your political beliefs.
And don't levitate anything without a permit.